Hi, bestie. I hope you're having a fantastic day. If you're watching the video version, Boomy has a few things to say. Okay, now he's just biting me. One second. Hi, bestie. How are you doing today? I hope you're having a fantastic day. Welcome or welcome back to the Best Friend Book Club. I'm so happy you made it. I'm Sarah, and today we are getting into A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. This is I call it theories, but just things that stuck out to me. How do they relate to the other series that she's written? So this is your spoiler warning. There might be some spoilers for Throne of Glass or Crescent City. I'll try to warn you right before I say something, but for the most part, yes, there will be spoilers. If you are interested in seeing episodes a couple days early, or you want access to the PDF versions of the summary and the theories for each book, make sure to check out Patreon. It's going to be patreon.com/bestfriendbookclubpodcast. I would really appreciate your support over there. And let's just jump right into all the theories. Let's go. Starting off with the map that's at the beginning of this book. When you open it up, it still has the wall marked on there. Now, I get it. That's the map from basically, I think it's the same map from A Court of Thorns and Roses. There might be some new sections added in for the parts on the continent. But so what I'm saying is, if you're going to add in parts on the continent, the wall's been destroyed. Why is the wall still on the map? Am I the only one that this bothers? I don't know why it bothers me so much, but I'm just like, it literally doesn't exist anymore. I'm just interested to find out if in book 6 we're going to get a new map with no wall, because still at this point in time, there is no wall. But okay, starting off with this piece that's before the first chapter. I talked a little bit about it in the last episode, but it says that one finger was pointed at the king of Hybern, which was a death promise and a target marked. So it literally says that she pointed her finger at him and she wasn't giving him the finger. I've literally seen people who have tattoos of a middle finger coming out of a cauldron, which, baddie, love it. It's just not the actual thing that's happening. So when she's in the cauldron, it says that it forges her brittle bones, like when she's becoming Fae, into fresh steel. I feel like that phrasing is intentional, because then it says she tore into the darkness of the cauldron with talons and teeth. And this just, spoiler warning kind of for Throne of Glass, this reminds me just a little bit of the Iron Teeth witches, because there's so many theories that Nesta's an Iron Teeth witch. I do think that this could kind of point to that. Talons and teeth, and then she's got fresh steel for bones now. Very interesting choices of words. When Nesta's talking about the fact that Feyre painted all of these portraits of everyone in the inner circle and then their family, but Nesta and their mother were missing, I immediately thought to myself, what did their mom do to Feyre? Because Feyre didn't really say anything about her mom, like any negative feelings towards her mom, in the time that we got Feyre's point of view. So now that it's Nesta's point of view, I just found that, like, what happened there? It's kind of explained a little bit later on, so I'll touch back to that in a second. And by a second, it could be 30 minutes from now, not too sure. When they're talking about Nesta's powers and basically what she got from the cauldron, it says that her high fae powers had never materialized. The powers that she has are just the powers that she took from the cauldron. Now, do we think this is something that could manifest later? Or I think because she gave back to the cauldron at the end what she took from it, but it didn't take everything. And then her high fae powers still haven't materialized. So I think she's still going to be just as powerful as she was with the stuff from the cauldron, because I do think their mom was fae. And so I think that her high fae powers are going to be heightened. I apologize to any Rhys fans because I really in A Court of Silver Flames and A Court of Frosted Starlight, I'm like not feeling this man. And I do point it out almost every single time he bothers me. So when they have this like intervention and Nesta and Rhys are talking, and he's like, oh, if you want to go head to head, like we can brawl out here, talking about like in front of the river house. He's like, we have plenty of space to fight. The immediate thought for me is like, why are you looking for an excuse to hit Nesta? I feel like he's looking for an excuse to take out all his anger on Nesta. And it's like, she's obviously not a trained fighter the way that Rhys is a trained fighter at this point in time. So to fight her knowing that she can't hold her own is like, I do not see this talked about enough. So Rhys has a working model of their world, stars, and the planets around them. And then it says he likes to ponder the existence of life beyond their own world. So this has been a thing the whole time. This is being said in A Court of Silver Flames. This is before, I think, we're getting what happens in Crescent City. So I don't know. How is this not talked about more? Like, Rhys fully has this like solar system model and ponders the existence of life beyond their own world. So he was already on that page. Do you get what I'm saying? I do think that Rhys and Azriel are keeping secrets once again, but that's what they do best. Because he tells Cassian that he needs to train Nesta because Azriel has too much on his plate. I feel like there's something more there that we'll get when we hopefully eventually get Azriel's point of view. I do think that it's going to be some big thing that he's been doing because he's been going back and forth to the human lands because he stays with Cassian and Nesta, but he's only there like a few times. I want to know what he's doing. And I'm sure it sounds like I am beating a dead horse. However, Cassian asks more. He's like, what's wrong? And she says, nothing. And then she's called a liar. So then she's like, oh, I'll tell you later. Her gift cannot be truth. Or her gift and her curse. Because that makes it sound like she has to tell the truth. And this is, she's clearly lying. But her gift is truth. It bothers me so much that we don't know more about her because I feel like there's something there. And continuing on with more, we have this situation where it says that it seemed that Moore was able to sense the direction of Cassian's thoughts. Okay, but then it specifically says, because it's Cassian's point of view, that Moore does not have the same skill set that Rhysand has, meaning she's not Daemati. She just learned to read the subtlest of expressions. I don't believe that. I don't believe it. I think that there's something else there because it happened with Cassian and it happened when Moore was talking to Feyre. This is going to be the 5th time that Nesta is referred to as a queen in this series. I don't remember how high up we get, so we'll find out together. But so Nesta is remembering her mom, and she says that her mom had told her that Elain will wed for love and beauty, but Nesta, and then she says, my cunning little queen shall wed for conquest. So it says that her mother had also called her like my Nesta and then my little queen, even on her deathbed. So that was said on the same page. She's called a queen twice on the same page. We're going to call that just the 5th time she's called a queen because it's by the same person in the same context. But it has to be important. What if their mom was a seer? Oh my God, that just occurred to me. What if their mom was Fae and she was a seer and she was telling Nesta, like, this is what's going to happen? That'd be pretty good. It would then confirm that Nesta's going to be a queen and that Elaine's just going to wed for love and beauty. Elaine will wed for love. That's going to be sitting in the back of my head now. But moving to when Cassian is training with Nesta, I believe this is when they're training, but he tells her that she would have made a fine general and she might still be one day. I can't help but think that she's going to be the general of the Valkyries or of the woman or female forces, especially with them pushing that they're trying to get more females to train in the Illyrian mountains. I do think that Nesta, I don't know how she would ever have the ability to fly. I guess that's not important, but I think she will be the general of the Valkyries, of like the reborn Valkyries. When Cassian and Nesta go to Windhaven and Devlin asks Nesta, "What's your business here?" and Nesta says, "Witchcraft." I think she's just giving into Devlin being like, she's a witch, but could it be more? Could it be that she's actually an Iron Teeth witch? Because we talked about it in A Court of Frost and Starlight, where Moore gives her kind of the definition of a witch. I think it's Moore talking to her, or Amryn, but someone's giving the definition of a witch and is like, all of the things that she said apply to Nesta, so maybe. But moving on to the hounds that Eris has. So he has these hounds that are said to be super rare. They're not bred often, but he has 12 of them. Super rare, but you have literally 12. Okay. And then when they're talking about Vasa and needing to return to the continent, it says that Feyre's father had made a bargain with Koshi. And the word bargain is used because before it was like he cut a deal, that kind of thing. But if Feyre's dad made a bargain with Koshi and then Feyre's dad dies, then the bargain doesn't exist anymore. Correct? Because when Feyre has the bargain with the bone carver, when the bone carver dies, the tattoo disappears. That's it. The bargain's over. So with Feyre's dad being dead, does Vasa now not have to return to the continent because the bargain was made with, made with the dad? Just me. Let me just get on my little tin hat real quick because this is a little Lucian. I don't want to call it, it's a little Lucian theory, okay? So Cassian is thinking about how Briolin might make a move against Nesta, which has him spiraling mentally because he's like, nah, that's my girl. And then on page 89, Lucian notices all this and he just says, easy, to Cassian, and flame sizzles in his eye, okay? It then says, there was surprising dominance within that flame that hit Cassian like a stone to the head. The only other person who's able to put that much dominance into their voice to get someone to do something is typically a High Lord like Rhys. Like, the only other time we really see that is, like, Rhys says something, and it's like, oh, there's so much dominance in his voice that it makes me do it. Specifically, we see it in A Court of Mist and Fury. But I was just like, oh, there's dominance within that flame. I really do think there's something more for Lucian. He's gonna be very powerful. But when they're at the human lands, Eris shows up. He sniffs the air, and then he says she couldn't be bothered to come inside to say hello, talking about Moore and how Moore was just there. He can smell her. This goes back to my friend's theory from several episodes ago. I'm pretty sure this is from A Court of Mist and Fury theories. But basically the theory being that Moore is mated to Eris, and that's why he's able to smell her in this moment. I don't know. I kind of like the idea of them being mated and that being the rejected mating bond thing and not the mating bond between Lucian and Elaine, because I really want them to end up together. So I'm just crossing my fingers that it's literally anyone else. When they're talking about healing Emery's wings, they're like, only the High Lord of Dawn would be able to heal these wings. And Feyre has his power. I think that Emery's wings will get healed. I think they'll figure out a way, but I do think that... Hold on. This just occurred to me. So remember when Azriel comes back at the end of Wings and Ruin, he comes back from Highburn, and Moore uses her magic to stitch him back up and to heal him? What if Moore's the one to heal Emery? Because remember that moment with them in the library that's later on? And it's like that moment. Emery's just like blushing over seeing Moore because she's like, oh my God, she's so pretty, which I don't think was put in there for no reason. So maybe Moore's the one that ends up healing Emery, because Moore definitely has some kind of healing power if she was able to just put her hand over Azriel's chest and it knits itself back together. So we know that Gwen is a quarter nymph. However, I think there's something else happening there. So when Nesta first comes across Gwen, she says that she sensed there was something mixed into Gwen other than high fae, and that she had some sort of secret hiding beneath the pretty face. Direct quote from the book was, "A crackling sort of energy buzzed around her, and Nesta's power grumbled in answer." So I think that's more than her just being a nymph. I think there's something else in there that we just don't know about yet. I do want to keep my eye on Gwen, my good eye on Gwen, because I don't believe that it's just that she's a quarter nymph and the rest is high fae. If she had this buzzing energy around her that caused Nessa's power to respond. But when Gwen introduces herself, she introduces herself with her family name, which is super uncommon. The only other family name I think that we know is Lucian's family name. And then Nesta says, even Rhys didn't use one, but she doesn't say that Rhys doesn't have one. I want to know what Rhys's family name is, because I feel like it's purposely being kept from us. And when it's dropped, it's going to be like, oh shit, like that's crazy. So giving into this theory that Nesta is an Iron Teeth witch, it says that Nesta has an iron will, and it's said a few different times. So it's said in A Court of Thorns and Roses, but it's also said here that when her eyes are growing heavy from reading in the library, the only thing that could hold them open is her iron will. Okay. So then this is the same chapter that Nesta falls down the stairs and she reaches her hand out to stop herself. And it says that her nails bite into stone and then sparks exploded. So I know people like to point to this and be like, she's an Iron Teeth witch. However, it says that her fingers were embedded in the stone rock and it was glowing as if it was lit with an inner flame. So there's that. But it also says, it's on page 121, that her nails had cracked after that happened. So if her nails or her fingers had turned into iron tips at the edge and that's what caused the sparking, how would her nails be cracked afterwards? I just feel like I don't think that that's pointing to her being an Iron Teeth witch, because I don't think that her nails would have actually cracked if that's what was happening. But it says that the rock had been glowing as if lit with an inner flame. And it's the same thing kind of that happens when she's talking about when she does that sparring with the dummy and then it turns to ash. That's kind of the same vibe that it gave me. But maybe I could be wrong. When Azriel decides to join them at the house and says it makes sense for the House of Wind to be his home base and he'll just winnow back and forth, I still am not understanding this, because Cassian literally says in Frost and Starlight that Azriel cannot winnow. So what's that about? I literally cannot wait to get my hands on an Azriel POV and a Lucian POV. I will be unbearable. But after that whole thing with Azriel being like, oh, I'm going to stay, Cassian and Nesta are arguing, and that's when he says, everyone hates you. That whole thing, it says that her fingers curled into claws scraping along the table. I don't know if that's just a way to say that her fingers curled or her fingers physically turned into claws, because that could point to, if they're able to turn into claws and then not be claws, that could be the answer to why there were sparks that flew when she fell down the stairs. Just my theory. Going back to the thing about what did Feyre's mom do to her, so Feyre talks to Cassian and she's like, their mom only had an interest in Nesta. Feyre was completely ignored by their mom. Elaine was just viewed as like a doll to dress up, but Nesta was hers. And I do think that their mom was Fae or something. There's no way she was just a human woman. But I don't want to dwell on that too much. So then when Cassian and Nesta make this bargain, it says that if it was broken, the magic could exact terrible revenge if they break their bargain. I want to go back to this bargain with Papa Archeron and the one he made with Koshi. It's not broken voluntarily. It was broken through death. So I think that Vass was off the hook because through the entirety of Silver Flame, she does not go back to Koshi. I think that they kind of found a loophole there. Maybe that's just wishful thinking. When I told you I wanted to keep my eye on Gwen, I meant it. So the words of the song that Gwen sings are in a language that Nesta doesn't know. It also says that Gwen's hair grows brighter when she sings. Her skin radiates this light that draws in any listener. Okay, I do think that some of those things could be associated with being a nymph, maybe. But there's something more with Gwen. I really do think so. But then we meet Meryl, and they're definitely hinting at this multiverse of madness when they're talking about Meryl's work, the existence of other realms, living on top of each other. The signs were there. The signs were most definitely there. Later on, Cassian and Nesta are having this conversation, and she's talking about how she took dancing lessons. They weren't always poor. Her dad was the prince of merchants. So then Cassian jokes about Nesta being the princess. And she's like, no, that was Elaine. And then she says, I was my mother's creature. Creature? Okay. So that could also get into the theory of her being an Iron Teeth witch, because she'd be something other, but that choice of words, kind of crazy. This is also the point that we're getting a few more hints that maybe something else happened in the woods that day with Eris and Mor. He says that Cassian should ask Mor what's true, and he says he thinks she finally knows the answer. So I do think that Eris did something. Maybe he was the one that called Asriel to come get Mor, maybe indirectly. I do think that Eris is going to get the good guy edit. He's going to get the turnaround. Slight Crescent City spoiler warning, but they talk about the 7th level of the library and how the darkness beckons. And then it says, like it was an entry into some dark pit of hell. Have we not seen the connection of the library being like an entrance into hell, and then the cat that's in the library and the cat in Crescent City? When I get to Crescent City, we'll kind of unpack it a little bit more, because for right now, this is laying down the groundwork. And then when I get to the other thing that connects, whether it's Crescent City or Throne of Glass, then we'll kind of piece it all together. We only see certain High Fae have the ability to put this authority into their voice to get others to do things, like we saw earlier with Lucian. But we see with Gwen telling Nesta, when she is talking about the darkness at the bottom of the library and Gwen kind of comes to save her, she tells her to leave one of the books, and it said that there was enough authority lacing her words that Nesta dropped the book onto a dark wooden table. So again, what else does Gwen have in her blood to be lacing this authority into her tone? And kind of connecting to the cat thing, Gwen describes the darkness as like a cat, small and clever and curious. But now that I think about it, the darkness in the library is said to be the heart of the library and the darkness that it carries. So I really wonder, because Nesta made the house, but the darkness had to have been there before that. There's no way it just got there when Nesta got there, because I feel like that would have been said. We can move on. I want to know more about these invoking stones. So the only time we really hear about it is on page 170, but Gwen describes it as similar to the siphons, but it's the power of the mother that flows through it, and they're not allowed to cause harm with it. I wonder if the description of, oh, they're similar to the siphons. Again, we saw in Wings and Ruin that Feyre used a siphon to look like an invoking stone to pretend to be Ianthe. So I wonder if their powers are similar. Well, I guess they're both used to channel power. So let me actually just... I need to stop focusing on these really small details. When they're talking about the creatures that Cassian put into the prison, he says some of them were the first gods. And I do believe that there is a Throne of Glass connection in there somewhere. But when we get there, we'll talk about it. I don't know if you've seen it, but when I was doing the reread, I was like, I'm sorry, what? So there's definitely an Iron Teeth witch being kept in the prison. Their name is Blue Anise. They're described to have cobalt skin and iron claws and a taste for female flesh. This is on page 179. I definitely think that's an Iron Teeth witch, but how'd she get there? How did she get there? I guess you can make the argument the same way everyone else got there. But again, on page 182, it says that Nesta's fingers curled into claws at her side. So I do think that that could be the iron. I don't know how it works, but it's said a few times that her fingers curled into claws. Moving into when Cassian is explaining how Illyrians possess magic only one night a year. It's the night before the blood rite. Cassian's like, don't even ask me. No one knows how they have it. Someone has to know. There's no way, not a single person knows why the Illyrians contain magic that one night a year. How does it even work? It almost feels like Sarah J. Maas is like, I don't want to get into the lore of this. Let's just be like, oh, don't ask. Moving on. But then Cassian tells her that only 12 people have made it to the mountain in the blood rite. Only 3 others besides the 3 Bat Boys have won the rite, and 2 of them died in the war. So that means there's only 1 person left who has made it to the top of Ramiel. I want to know who it is. Part of me is like, is it Devlin? Because it's the only other person that I can think of, but I don't know. I feel like that was said in a way that was like, we'll come back to this guy later. Switching gears really quickly, I want to talk about Elaine's scent. So it is described as jasmine and honey and like a promise of spring. There's so many connections between Elaine and spring. I wonder how that's going to play out, because Sarah J. Maas has literally said Tamlin's not going to get a redemption arc. So how is that going to work? How is that going to work? Speaking still of Elaine, Nesta recalls a conversation that she had with her mother. And she said Elaine has no ambition and does not dream beyond her garden and pretty clothes. I'm interested to eventually get Elaine's point of view, because I feel like that isn't true, but that's just kind of the facade that Elaine has built up. She then says that there's no men here, meaning in Prythian, I'm assuming, worthy of either of them, and that the mom is trying to convince their dad to take them to the continent to go find better suited matches for them. Here's my theory. I think their mom knows that there's more fae, and I think their mom might come from somewhere on the continent, but their mom is like, oh, there's more over there, and they keep hinting at, let's go to the continent, let's go to the continent. There's something else there, and I could see it being that the world of Throne of Glass is over there. I was gonna just disprove that with a point from Throne of Glass, but we will get there when we get to that book. But the 6th time that Nesta is called a queen, she is sitting by the fireplace, and Cassian describes her as a queen on a quilted throne. You guys can't tell me that these mentions of her being a queen are just in passing. There's no way this is a coincidence. I talked about this a little bit in A Court of Frost and Starlight's theories episode, but Nesta says quite a few times, Rhys is not her High Lord. She's like, you're not my High Lord. That's not my High Lord. So who is? And does she not have one because she's going to ultimately be High Lady of her own court, perhaps the prison? And then later on, when Cassian and Nesta are arguing, she's like, you're an arrogant bastard. And he says, you're a haughty witch. We're evenly matched. Again, calling Nesta a witch. But I don't know if this is in place of calling her a bitch, because it's kind of done later or earlier on in other books, calling someone a witch. But I think it's just meant to be like, you're a bitch. Maybe not. Let's move over to the Dread Trove. So some people claim that there's 4 items of the Dread Trove, but the 4th one had been unmade, so there's really only 3. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. But the 3rd one, or the 4th one, was unmade. I think the 4th one is with Miriam and Dracon because that's what brought her back, which we've talked about a little bit before. It says that the mask that's used to raise the dead is molded from the face of a long-forgotten king. Now, is that King Fionn or someone else? But they only had one high king in Prythian. But could it be a king from the continent? Because there was the king of Hybern. I want to know who the mask is modeled after. And then the harp is introduced. It literally says it can open any door, some say, between worlds. The hints were there. So when we get the crossover that we do, I mean, the writing was on the wall. I don't know if this scene is significant at all, but I just made note of it. So when Nesta finds out that Feyre is pregnant, it says that she bows her chin slightly to Rhys to let him know that she means no harm. And then he, in turn, dips his chin to her. I wonder if this was almost foreshadowing him bowing to her at the end of the book. Like, finding out she's pregnant, Nesta bows her head, and then Nesta saves the baby. He fully bows to her. I don't know. I think this is such an important piece of information that not enough people talk about when they're talking about how the magic does not always go to the firstborn in the High Lord's bloodline. It says sometimes the magic abandoned the bloodline completely. Okay. I think that's going to mean when whatever happens, that Nesta's going to get some type of power. I think. What if their mom was like a descendant of a high fae, like a high lord? This is just me, this is just the way my brain works. But I'm like, what if their mom was a descendant of a high lord, but she wasn't the heir, and then when the rest of the family, like there's no one else, the power then goes to Nesta. I think I just want Nesta to be queen of something. I really do. But I feel like that piece of information could be important for later books. I guess we'll put a pin in that until we get to read ACOTAR 6 and 7. The fact that when Rhys tells him about the trove, he's like, do not tell anybody. This stays within these walls. Nesta immediately goes to Gwen. She's like, hey, girl, so what do you know about the trove? I think it's so funny. And then Gwen, she's like, oh, you can't tell anyone. Gwen told Meryl. They're just, no one listens to Reese, which, yes, love it. Again, it's mentioned that Nesta has an iron will when Clotho is talking to Cassian, like when she's writing, and she says Nesta has a will of iron. I feel like that's important because it's said so often. I didn't count how many times that was said. I did count how many times she was called a queen because we have the 7th one coming up. I think before that, though, the note that I wrote was, I may be being delusional here, but when Gwen's eyes are described, it says that it's a near perfect match to the stones as the other priestesses wore. Now, just bear with me for a second. So if Gwen's eyes are the perfect match to the invoking stones, which are similar enough to Azrael's siphons, could this point to them being together? Now, I know it's such a small thing to point to, but her eyes being a perfect match to the invoking stones, which she used Azrael's siphon to pretend to be an invoking stone. She belongs with Azrael, okay? Just let me dream. But going back to the 7th time that Nesta's called a queen that I told you about, when she breaks things off with Thomas, he says, you think you're better than me? Acting like a queen when you haven't got shit. So this is going back to when she broke up with him because he would not go with her to save Feyre. Then we have Nesta talking about the continent and how Nesta thinks that she's thinking about how Elaine just wanted to go to study the tulips and the flowers, but her imagination stretched no further. Now, this is in chapter 25, I believe. Yes, chapter 25. But it says, beyond that, the continent was vast, and to the south, another continent sprawled. What do you mean another continent? So what you're telling me is this map at the beginning, that there's the continent that continues down to, I'm fully trying to open it while I'm talking, but there's another continent underneath that. Hold on, let me grab the Throne of Glass map. So even then, looking at Aurelia, it feels like this is just the continuation of the first continent that we're talking about, but another continent south of the continent that they already know. There has to be a connection there, especially because when you look at the Throne of Glass map, it cuts off at the top. And then the one for A Court of Silver Flames, the continent cuts off at the bottom. I guess we'll get to that when we talk about Throne of Glass. But speaking of the continent, Nesta talks about her mother had one cousin who lives on the continent, and she's talking about them in the sense that they forgot about them when they fell in hard times and all of that. Who could this cousin be? And could this cousin be Faye? Because also it's mentioned, I think I pointed it out in Wings and Ruin or Mist and Fury, but that their mom had a cousin that was drowned by water wraiths, that whole thing. Their mom was definitely Faye. Okay, I'm sorry. I need to stop. So we're going to move on to the 8th time that Nesta is called a queen. It's Cassian's point of view. They're staring at each other, and it says her lip curves upward. And then he says, a queen triumphant. It's said so many times. This is the 8th time in the series that Nesta is called a queen, and it's just in these casual settings, but it means something. It definitely means something. Again, it is mentioned that when Nesta's in the library, she can usually find Gwen by her singing. I wonder if there's anything that points to what else Gwen could be, because I think the singing thing has to do with her being a nymph, I guess. I just think that there's something more to Gwen. And then when they're in the library, they come across Meryl, and I want to know more about her. So it says there's a phantom wind around her. She says that the wind whispers to her about what's going on in the world. So I think Meryl's pretty powerful, because that sounds to me like the bone carver being like, oh, things are whispered to me from the stone. This is also when we find out that she's descended from Rabith, who is Lord of the Western Wind. So there's gotta be something more there, and I hope we see more Meryl, which I think we will because we'll be seeing more Gwen because she ends up with Azriel. That's what I'm going with. And, sorry, I just got this thought. If Gwen is supposed to end up with Azriel, who is one of the most powerful Illyrians in history and has all this power, his mate would need to match him in that. So Gwen has to be more powerful than what we know so far. That's the theory I'm sticking with. Just the tiniest little hint that Nesta might be a Iron Teeth witch. It says that she drops the threat of her power, quelling its magic with an iron hand. It's just, especially with Nesta, a lot of things are iron. She's got the claws, iron will. It's just said a lot. So I don't know if she could be an Iron Teeth witch and also be queen of something. Who knows? I don't. I'll ask Sarah J. Maas. So when Gwen is talking about how she's a quarter river nymph, her grandparents were a river nymph and a high fae from Autumn Court. Immediately, I'm like, could her dad be Baron? And I don't know why I just thought that. Doesn't she have red hair? I mean, I'm sure most of the people in Autumn have red hair. But what if not her dad, but her grandpa was Baron? Huh. Maybe that doesn't make sense. What do I know? Moving right along, when Nesta is having this nightmare and Rhys shows up to try to dim her powers, he's like, this is only the surface of her powers. Now, at the end, when she gives her powers up, it says it only took some of it. I think that she's still super powerful. Only part of her powers went away. And if a fraction of her power Rhys was fighting to get under control, I think she's still super powerful and has the ability probably to be queen of something. Like has enough power to be considered queen. I know so many people talk about this, but I don't understand how they have the magic to do basically everything except cut a baby out of the womb. What do you mean? I just have a really hard. You have the best healers, but you can't do a little C-section in Valaris. And I feel like the reason for that is just to make things more complicated. Because if the solution is just, oh, we'll just cut the baby out, then there's no drama. So I get it. But then Rhys and Feyre are talking about Nesta and her mental shields that are described as a fortress of solid iron. Mm-hmm. The hints are there. The hints are definitely there. So I don't know if I was being crazy, if I was looking for things that weren't there. However, it was a very interesting choice of words when it's said they're talking about Rhys's eyes. It says, stars were born and died in his eyes. Stars were born? Starborn? Hello? Anyone? Bueller? That just stuck out to me. I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Stars born in his eyes? Mm-hmm. We will talk about it more when we get to that book, but I just thought that was interesting. When they get to the bog and Nesta's asking what else lives there, Cassian says some people think witches live in the bog and not the humankind. He says the kind that drink blood to fill the coldness the magic left in them. Could this be a hint at something in a later book or a connection from another book? So Blue Annis, who's in the prison, has iron teeth. I think it's iron claws. I forgot already. Yeah, okay. So Blue Annis has cobalt skin, iron claws, and a taste for female flesh. So that's the kind that drink blood to fill the coldness the magic left in them. Flesh, blood. I really want to say my theory as to what that could be, but I kind of want to wait until we get to Throne of Glass. So I will wait on that one. I'll have to make a note to myself because I feel like that could be a good one. Oh, it wasn't said in another book. It was said in this book. So Nesta recalls a time that her mom told her a story that when she was told her a story when she was a child that her cousin was murdered by fairies and that she saw her dragged into the water. Her mom has to be Fae. Has to be Fae of some sort. When Nesta puts the mask on her face, it says that so the mask is described as primitive but embossed with whorls and patterns so ancient they lost all meaning. No, they didn't, because they're word marks. They have to be word marks. Anyone else? I honestly feel like the longer I talk about these things or think about them, the crazier I feel. This is going to kind of be a crazy connect, but just bear with me. So I find it interesting that the only winged horses that exist are Helion's flying horses. He has 7 breeding pairs of these horses. It says that most had just vanished as if they'd been devoured by the sky itself. Now, can we talk about that for a second? Because remember how Amren said the sky opened up and she went through this hole in the sky to end up in Prithian. So the same could be said for these flying horses. The sky opened up and they ended up somewhere else. It then says that according to legend, the Pegasuses had come from the island that the prison sat on. We will come back around to that. This makes me think of Jelly Jubilee from Crescent City. The only other time that we see a winged horse, obviously not a real one, but I feel like there has to be something there. But when Cassian says to Nesta, he says, I've needed you from the moment I first met you, and now that I have you, I don't want to stop. He knew. Later on, he says that he knew from their first kiss, like that really solidified that they were mates, but he knew. Come on, he knew. Minor Throne of Glass spoilers, so I'd say skip ahead about a minute. But this is a direct quote from chapter 42. It says, once the High Fae were more elemental, more given to reading the stars and crafting masterpieces of art and jewelry and weaponry. Their gifts were rawer, more connected to nature, and they could imbue objects with that power. This makes me think the Throne of Glass character's magic is more elemental. It just felt like they were kind of describing Throne of Glass in that way, and I just kind of was like, oh, once upon a time, the High Fae were more elemental. Interesting. So remember earlier when Nesta was like, I hate Rhys, and Cassian's like, everyone hates you, and then he was like, oh, a couple days later, I didn't actually mean that. Not everyone hates you. I've never hated you, Nesta. And she's like, well, I never hated you. Cassian does say one time that he hates Rhys. And the only time he says it is when Rhys is like, we don't want to tell Nesta about these swords that she accidentally imbued. Every other time Cassian's talking about Rhys, he respects his decision as a High Lord. That's his High Lord. But not this time. He literally says that he hates Rhys in this moment. I mean, same, but like Cassian saying that, kind of crazy. So speaking of Rhys, he says that he'll bow before no one and nothing but his crown, right? Right. But we know he bows to Nessa at the end, but not enough people talk about Rhys gets on his knees and begs Helion to find something to save Feyre. So he does bow when it's necessary. He likes to talk this big game, but he will bow if he needs to. So when they're talking about these great swords, and they're saying that Amarantha destroyed one of the great swords by throwing it into the sea, that doesn't destroy something. Someone else is going to find it, and it's going to be a thing. Oh, she destroyed it. She threw it in the sea. That's not destroying it. If you throw it into a volcano, sure. The sea? No. They're definitely going to be able to get it back, and I just wonder how that's going to play out. This is when they're trying to convince Rhys to be High King, which I don't want to see him as High King, but Amren argues that if all 7 courts were united under the same ruler, they'd have better odds of survival because they wouldn't have to deal with basically Baron. But to me, the solution to that is just take Baron out, replace him with Eris, and then you won't have any issues because none of the other courts have issues with each other. And then Amren says to Rhys, why do you shy from the power that is your birthright? Meaning, I think, he's so powerful that he should be king. Unless it's his birthright in the sense that he's a descendant of Fionn. Moving right along to when Nesta and Cassian go to the Spring Court. Nesta thinks to herself that the Spring Court had been made for someone like Elaine. I really want to see how that's going to play out because obviously she's mated to Lucian. We have been told directly by Sarah J. Maas that she doesn't think Tamlin's going to get a redemption arc. How the spring is always associated with Elaine, so I'm very interested. This is another time that Nesta is called a witch. Tamlin calls her that when she points at him, and it says that the ground shook after that happened. And then he says, put that finger down, you witch. Okay, at that point, I don't think it's him calling her a bitch. I think he's genuinely like, oh shit, you got some kind of other power? Like, don't point at me. I haven't seen these lines connected anywhere, but the bargain tattoo that Nesta and Cassian have that's this 8-pointed star, that's the star. The 8-pointed star is used to map how to strike with a sword. And it's mentioned throughout the story, but I've never heard someone connect those two things. So their bargain tattoo is the map on how to strike with a sword, which I just think is cool. Which I guess it goes away now that I think about it, because the bargain was called in. Cassian talks a little bit about the Valkyries. We find out that his first lover outside the Night Court was a Valkyrie. Her name was Tanwyn, and that she rode into battle at the head of the Valkyries, and she didn't come back. Interesting. Cassian has a thing for a strong woman, so love that for him. Separately, I don't know why this made me laugh, but on page 469, it says that Cassian flipped off his High Lord. She didn't say used a vulgar gesture, which means that the vulgar gesture is not flipping someone off. Or, now that I'm thinking about it, Feyre is the one that says a vulgar gesture, a vulgar gesture. And Nesta's like, he flipped him off. I'm trying to think if Nesta ever said vulgar gesture. Again with Nesta pointing at someone. So she pointed at the King of Hybern, killed him. Points at Tamlin, nothing really happens there, but he's like, oh, don't point at me. So then again, when Nesta's arguing with Amren and she's like, you voted against me, but the whole thing with the swords, she points her finger at Amren and Amren steps out of the way of her finger. That has to mean something. Like, Amren knows that there's more to Nesta. I mean, at this point, Nesta still has all her powers, so spooky, scary, but there's more to her. I said it a little bit in the last episode, but when Rhys tells Cassian, get Nesta out of here before I fucking kill her, take several seats. Take several seats, because you as her mate should have fucking told her that, and you didn't. So don't talk, oh, I'm gonna fucking kill her. Really? I highly doubt it. Because now I'm thinking, what would happen if Cassian, like, basically if Rhys tried to kill Nesta? I honestly don't know if he could if her power is pure death. And he was struggling to get a portion of her power under control. And then Cassian, like, would obviously step in if you're trying to kill his mate. Would they be able to kill Rhys? The most powerful High Lord in history? So when Cassian takes Nesta to these mountains after Rhys is like, get her out of here, he says that Mor had told him long ago these lands were used for healing. It was used for people who were injured in body and spirit, and they would go to this lake to recover, and that's where he's taking Nesta. Do we have any theories on this lake on how it could potentially connect to something else? Because whenever we get this, oh, long ago this happened, I'm immediately locked in. I'm like, what's going on here? It could also just be nothing. I don't know why I'm so suspicious of characters that are like, oh, she responded to my inner thoughts. What's going on there? So Gwen is talking to Nesta about coming to services, and there's a part where Nesta thinks to herself that Gwen's going to eventually learn how horrible Nesta has been. And then it says that apparently Gwen read the thoughts on her face because she responded to Nesta's inner thoughts. Very suspicious. Gwen's got something else happening. For sure. for sure. And then when they are at the services, the lyrics of the songs that are sung are of a language so old no one voices them anymore. I think they're speaking in the ancient tongue that's used in Throne of Glass. Hold on a minute. Everything's like occurring to me as I read the notes and then I think for a second, I'm like, oh wait, hold on a second. So Cassian says that Rhys told him that the island that the prison sits on might have been an eighth court. I think that's going to be important later because I think it will be turned into an eighth court and that ultimately Nesta will be the queen of it. But maybe not. But when they find the harp, it's also sitting on an 8-pointed star. So yes, the 8-pointed star was also the map for striking with a sword. But the fact that the harp is sitting on an 8-pointed star, that's not nothing. That is important. And I wonder how that all connects to Nesta. But when they're at the prison and Lanthus is talking to Nesta, he asks what she is, and she says, a witch from Orid's dark heart. So again, she's saying she's a witch. Does she know she's a witch, or is she just saying that? Or is she saying that because she heard the definition from the witch in the last book, in Frost and Starlight? She's like, actually, I am a witch now that I think about it. This is also, once they get the harp, we find out that there's 26 strings on the harp, which coincides with the 26 dimensions that Meryl talks about. However, we know that the 26th string is time, so that's not a dimension, I don't think. Unless it is, and I'm just crazy. But during this whole thing, Lanthus asks Nesta which death god she is. So she's going to be something more. She is. This then leads into the 9th time that Nesta is called a queen. So this is when Lanthus is showing Nesta what they could be together, all the greatness that they can achieve, that whole thing. And he says, come with me, queen of queens, and we shall return what was once lost. Queen of queens. Uh-huh. I'm like so excited for Nesta to be queen of something. I'm excited for that. I've mentioned this before, but on page 548, they talk about the 4th object of the trove. And it seems like age-worn bone, but it is veiled in shadow. And I think it has that glamour around it that the rest of the trove had that it didn't want to be found. And I think it's glamored by Miriam and Dracon. When Lanthus is finally bound into a Fae body, when his blood is spilled, that blood is black. That can't be a coincidence. I don't think it can. I'm starting to get a little stressed out about this whole thing with Elaine and Spring and all these mentions of it. So when they go back to the cottage in the human land, Nesta shows Cassian this carving that their dad made for Elaine. It is a rose carved from a dark sort of wood. Could this all mean something? The rose, A Court of Thorns and Roses takes place mostly in the Spring Court. Spring is mentioned a lot with Elaine. I'm just interested to see how that all plays out. Later on, when Moore goes to the library, she's described as shining like a ray of sunshine. And then it says, even the darkness at the bottom of the library seemed to slither away. Could this be a hint at Moore's powers? Because I know she has more powers than Truth. You can't tell me she doesn't. But could this be a hint to something more? And I kind of talked about it earlier, but do we think that Emery and Moore could end up together? Just asking. Because I don't know, I just think it'd be interesting. Like the only little thing that we get is Emery blushing when she sees Moore. Moore doesn't even talk to her. So maybe I'm just being delusional. But then Nesta's talking about this other card figure that her dad made. It's described as a supple-bodied female with her arms upraised, clasping the full moon. Just genuine question, does this sound like any of the goddesses from Throne of Glass? Because I feel like it sounded a little familiar. I just couldn't put my finger on it. But once I do my Throne of Glass reread, I'm sure I'll find it. Again, talking about the library and the lowest levels, Nesta is thinking about the bottom and she says, to the pit itself. So again, talking about the center of the library, the bottom of the library being the pit, like the pits of hell. So this first time, technically, Nesta's not being called a queen, but Nesta wears this tiara with glinting black stone when she goes to the hewn city. And the only other person that wears a tiara was, or at the time, Feyre was wearing a tiara before she was High Lady of the Night Court. And so this is Nesta wearing a crown or a tiara, I don't know what the difference is, before going into the hewn city. Then we have the 10th time that she's called a queen. She looks in the mirror as she's getting ready, and she said that she had seen a queen of the night. Okay, she calls herself a queen in that sense, but yes. Again, not directly calling Nesta a queen, but Cassian's thinking to himself, only a king or an emperor would do for Nesta and her level of skill, not a prince like their mother wanted for her. So only a king would be suitable for her because she's a queen. Later on, when Nesta's talking to Eris, he says, don't believe the lies they tell you about me. She knows the truth, but has never revealed it. Again, I do think that Eris is going to come out as the good guy ultimately. I don't know how, but I believe in Sarah J. Maas. Really quick. So the gift that Cassian got for Nesta in A Court of Frost and Starlight was a miniature manuscript, could fit in a doll's hands. It says it was made by the smallest of Fae. This reminds me of the little folk from Throne of Glass. Could the little folk also exist in Valaris, in Prythian, and I don't know. I'm just like, made by the smallest of Fae. Anyone else? But we'll just move on to the 11th time that Nesta is called a queen. Cassian says that he was jealous of Eris, and he says, you looked like a queen, and it was painfully obvious that you should be with a princeling like Eris, and not a lowborn nothing like me. So again, calling her a queen. So when Cassian and Nesta finally get their heads out of their asses and they get together, it's described as thread after thread of pure golden light floating into each other, all of this. It says that the threads wove together, life glowed like starfire. Hello, starfire. And she had never seen anything more beautiful, felt anything more beautiful, blah, blah, blah. Starfire? So this is the bond solidifying between them, correct? It's the bond solidifying, but it still hasn't been fully accepted because they haven't exchanged the food thing. Like, are they mates or are they not mates? Like, yes, they're mates, but are they locked in? Can the bond be broken now because it hasn't fully been accepted? I just find that interesting. I don't think that Sarah J. Maas would spend all this time on this couple to then have them not ultimately end up together, but crazier things have happened. I do think that Gwen ultimately ends up with Azriel. We have a part where it says Cassian glanced over at Az, but his attention was fixed on the young priestess, admiration and quiet encouragement shining on his face. And we do have the bonus chapters, which I'll have to get to another day, but I do think that he ends up with Gwen. This is going to be a major spoiler warning for Throne of Glass. So please, if you have not read it, skip forward. We'll call it a full minute. I'm going to give you a couple seconds if you put your phone down somewhere to get back to the phone so that you can skip through. But we're going to start talking about Throne of Glass now. So it says that the mood hadn't been helped by a rare red star blasting across the sky one day. An ill omen. This is Aelin from Kingdom of Ash. In that chapter in Kingdom of Ash, she sees a heavily pregnant female, which we know that Feyre is obviously pregnant at this time. So yes, we see it in Kingdom of Ash, but we're also seeing it in Silver Flames, which I did not notice before because I hadn't read Throne of Glass yet. Welcome back to everyone who skipped ahead from earlier. I missed you. So, Eris is saying to Nesta, he says, stay with the Night Court and you risk your ruin. Now, is this hinting that she's ultimately going to end up somewhere else? Or is that just him being like, you risk your ruin because you're not with me, baby? Come over to the Autumn Court. I don't know. But I do think Eris will be important. I just thought it was interesting that when Nesta is in the blood rite, she's talking about how far away Ramiel is. And she's talking about all the obstacles that she has to face. And then she says, and the gods knew what else. But I found it interesting that she didn't say the mother, because usually they talk about the mother. But the fact that she said the gods knew what else. Okay. On page 684, Emery is talking about one of the battles that was fought long ago between the Fae and the ancient beings who oppressed them, the Daglin, I'm assuming, and how they were, for whatever reason, air quotes around, for whatever reason, desperate to reach the stone at the top of the mountain. I think that that stone is a gate to another world. I think that at the end of the blood rite, when Gwen and Emery touch it, it's a gate that takes them to the river house. But I think that they were trying to get to it because it's some type of gate. That's just me. When Nesta goes to hold the line and she draws a line and she's like, no one's going to get past me at this archway, she says that she could have sworn she felt warmth and breath when she hit the archway. What could that possibly mean? When she touched the stone of the archway, she felt warmth and breath. I'm very interested to see if that could turn into literally anything. I talked about it in the last episode, but I really hate how much POV switching we get. Like right when you get into it, it switches over. And maybe that's how it feels doing the tandem read for Throne of Glass. I haven't done the tandem read yet. So maybe it's like you're really getting into it and then it's like, oh, psych, switch POVs. Now that I'm thinking about it, me saying, oh, what if Vasa's mated to Koshi? Kind of insane. But the only line that made me think that was, it's in chapter 71. Koshi says, tell my Vasa I'm waiting. He says, my Vasa. It's probably just him being possessive of her because, he's been keeping her. But I'm like, what if that means they're mates? I don't know what I was on that day. The first time that Nesta actually acknowledges that Cassian is her mate is when she's fighting Bellius in hand-to-hand combat. And she's like, oh, my mate taught me well. That is the first time that she's like, oh, that's my mate. I love it. In the last two chapters being 72 and 73, they're not the last two chapters of the book, but in those two chapters, we see a lot of shifts in the weather, and I was wondering if it could be Cassian or Nesta, and like the rage that they're filled with creates this level of magic that causes the weather to shift. But literally turn the page, and it says, even nature could be influenced by the crown. I think that's going to come back later. Like something's going to happen, and they're going to use the crown to influence nature. When Briolyn is talking to Nesta, she's like, I promise to leave Cassian and Nesta. So I promise to leave the two of you untouched. And she just wants to make herself young again. And that's all she wants. It says that Nesta scented the lie. How is she able to scent the lie? Obviously, you can sense it and be like, no, that bitch is lying to me. But she could scent it? Mm-mm. Mm-mm. So the way that my stomach damn near fell out of my ass when Cassian turns the knife on himself, I was so stressed, crying, like snot coming out the nose. I was going through it. But when this happens, the magnitude of Nesta's power is so crazy. So it says, avalanches cascaded down the cliffs. Trees bent and ruptured in the wake of her power. There were tsunamis. Glasses shook and shattered in Valaris. Books tumbled off of shelves in Helion's libraries. And the cottage that they used to live in the human lands crumbled. So that means, I think, that her power could be felt on the continent. And I think we'll get a little bit more of that later. Like, this crazy disaster happened, and it was Nesta's power. So after the blood rite, we go back to the whole thing with Feyre. Oh my god, Feyre's having the baby. Okay. So when Nesta changes Feyre's anatomy, I think they're going to have more children. I think Rhys and Feyre will continue to have kids, although it's super rare super rare to have kids. I think Reese and Faye are going to have like 4 children, and Cassie and Nesta will eventually have kids because she also changed her own anatomy. But this confirms to me, if she didn't change Elaine's anatomy, Elaine doesn't end up with Azriel. But then I was thinking, Gwen's anatomy wasn't changed. So it could be Gwen or Elaine still. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but Reese falls to his knees, takes Nesta's hand, presses his mouth to her fingers, and thanks her for saving his family after saying he'll bow to no one but his crown. So he bowed to Helion, he bowed to Nesta. He bowed to Helion to beg him to do something for him, but for Nesta, it's like thanking her, and I just was like, I really like that moment. It kind of came full circle because Reese was really pissing me off. So when Nesta gives back the power to the cauldron, and she now has this new bargain tattoo with the cauldron. Crazy to have a bargain with the cauldron. I think she will still be really powerful, which I've talked about. But it says something else stopped the cauldron from taking all of it. And they suspected it could be the mother. But how could the mother be stepping in on Nesta's behalf for her to keep her power? Ooh, I don't know. Because then Cassian thinks to himself that Nesta seemed to have some sort of connection or understanding with the mother, but he'll think about that some other day. No, I'm thinking about it today, Cassian, and I need you to lock in because that's the only way I'm going to get more information. It's like, we'll think about it another day. How is Nesta so connected to the mother? So we find out that Eris let himself get tortured by Baron. He still gave away nothing about the alliance with the Night Court. Props to Baron. No, props to Eris, not Baron. But I do think that he's going to become part of the inner circle. I think. Maybe I'm really hopeful, but I hope he does become part of the inner circle. As of chapter 80, which is the last chapter in this book, Cassian and Nesta have not had their official mating ceremony. It's going to be 3 days from the end of this book. I wonder if something's going to get in the way of Cassian and Nesta actually completing their mating ceremony, or if they're going to be in this state of like limbo. Are they mated? Are they not? Because of the stuff that happens later on. If they're going to have to push the mating ceremony, like, I don't know. I just feel like it's not going to happen, because if it were going to happen, I feel like it would just have happened to close out this book. But maybe that's me just being delusional. They never speak mind to mind. Cassian and Nesta never speak mind to mind. And I find that very interesting. I don't know. I just feel like they don't feel like mates in the way that Reese and Feyre felt like mates. When I did a reread of this book in July of 2023, I wrote at the end of it, and I wrote the date, I think that the next book will open with Nesta and Cassian's mating ceremony, and I even put it might be from Elaine's point of view. But knowing what we know now about everything that happens in Crescent City, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me while I tell you all of my very unhinged thoughts on A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. If you have listened this far, you are officially a baddie. I don't make the rules, but you're part of the baddie club. Welcome. I'm so happy you're here. You can either DM me or comment underneath my most recent post. We're going to do a mountain emoji for today with a little bit of snow on top. And you can find me on Instagram at bestfriend.bookclub or at Simply Serotonin. It's simply SARATONIN. You can find me on YouTube and TikTok at bestfriend.bookclub. And if you want to support me on Patreon, I would really appreciate it. It's patreon.com/bestfriendbookclubpodcast. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.